First of all, I'd like to thank all the previous speakers for the wonderful talks and apologise. Most of my talks have been used, so you'll have to listen to them again. There you go. And this talk started out as a dissertation on Yeats and Tolkien's treatment of immortality and specifically immortal elves. And a large part of it was initially devoted to Celtic mythology and spent the time proving that Tolkien was indeed influenced by Celtic myth despite him claiming otherwise. This argument has been championed elsewhere by Dimitri Feeney, and I'm sure the speaker of the Green Island later on in the evening will deal with this question in a much more convincing manner than I. Considering the time constraint, and since this is a seminar specifically on Tolkien, I've omitted the Yeats part, save for a few cursory mentions, and if you'd like to read more about Yeats specifically, I can link you to the original dissertation after the talk. So Tolkien describes his writing, especially for Lord of the Rings, as being primarily concerned with death, immortality, and the escapes, serial longevity and cordial memory. Flieger explains that the two terms are evidence of the author working around any mention of reincarnation, as reincarnation would be seen as unorthodox according to the Catholic doctrine. Holding memory, according to Flieger, is a psychic or psychological channel between characters in a narrative present and a distant past beyond their waking memory. For example, in two of Tolkien's abandoned endeavours, The Lost Road and The Notion Club Papers, two modern-day Englishmen travel back to Numenor through the unconscious memories of their ancient forebears. Serial longevity is referred to as rebirth in Tolkien's later writing, and Flieger attributes this change of terms to Tolkien leaving the concept safely confined to imaginary beings because rebirth and therefore reincarnation is only available to elves. Tolkien writes that elves are immortal, at least as far as this world goes, but of course what is this world that the writer refers to? Is it Middle-earth, or perhaps the whole of Arda, encompassing both Middle-earth and Aman? Or is it the world in which Tolkien is writing these lines in a letter to Milton Wolsman? Elves are not exempt from death, because there are times of great trouble and death afflicts all the Eldar as it does all other living things in Arda, as Tolkien writes in Fourth Custom of the Eldar. So they're not immortal in the conventional sense of the OED definition of immortality being an exemption from death. Tolkien writes that they are rather concerned with the grief and burden of deathlessness in time and change than with death. Tolkien sets the terms of life and death in a fairly straightforward fashion in the Laws and Customs of the Eldar. According to the text, no living person incarnate may be without a fair nor without a hondo or proa. The fair, a soul or a spirit, is indestructible within the bounds of Arda, while the hondo, body, may be destroyed by violence or through the passage of time. Once the union of body and spirit is broken, or the body is no longer fit to house the spirit, the person dies. On the other hand, why does Tolkien find it necessary to elaborate that no person incarnate specifically may be alive without both fair and hondo? And it appears that apart from lending life to the body, the spirit has a sort of life of its own. As soon as the fair is disbodied, it's summoned to go to the halls of waiting. However, going to Mandos is a voluntary choice, and the soul is free not to heed it. This liberty explains the presence of unhoused fair in Middle-earth and their interaction with the living. However, it does not explain the presence of various other beings in whom the union has been ruptured, but they're still kind of around. I hesitate to use the term alive, but they're definitely conscious. And three major types. We'll start with Miriel, whose body remains unwithered after the soul leaves it and exists in a kind of vegetative state. The Estes handmaidens tend it in Lothlorien, hoping that one day the spirit may return to it. So it's still fit for the spirit's habitation, but her fair never comes back, and it just continues existence in this kind of arrested vegetative state. The army of the dead are cursed to rest never until their oath is fulfilled. They've slowly dwindled in the barren hills, having outlived their natural human lifespans. They've died natural death, but their spirits continue to haunt Middle-earth as ghosts. The Nazgul have fallen under the influence of the Great Rains, and there is no mention anywhere of them having died a physical death, but they have become beings of will that are invisible and have to use real cloaks to give shapes to their nothingness. So they're tangible in a way, but still invisible. All these characters exist in the liminal space between the living and the dead, and they partially erase the boundary between the two states, and because of them, death stops being this feared great unknown. Living characters can imagine what may happen to them after they die, and even hope to meet their deceased loved ones while alive. Tolkien writes on several occasions that fear of death itself is unnatural, that death, as Andrew was mentioned previously, is but the name we give to that which Melkor had tainted, and it sounds therefore evil, but untainted, its name would be good. And I couldn't help but including a quote from the films that Gandalf says that death is just another path, one that we all must take. So it's a natural, almost, process. But once this fear of death is allayed, it's replaced by another, and that is fear of decrepitude and barrenness. And this is, to my mind, the most horrible effect of the One Ring. It seems to facilitate immortals the same perpetuity that's already available to the elves, but it's always presented as a negative effect. And a mortal who keeps one of the great rings does not die, but he does not grow or obtain more life. He merely continues until at last every minute is awareness. And if he often uses the ring to make himself invisible, he fades. He becomes in the end invisible permanently and walks in twilight under the eye of the dark power that rules the rings. And the ring imparts the same burden of continuity that I've mentioned Tolkien say the elves are concerned with. This kind of burden does not only inflict Tolkien's elves. To an extent, it is known to all elder races. Anna Maffei notes that this is not only the fear of the individual, but of whole societies. For example, hobbits, who are a young society, are very closely knit, and bachelors are seldom among them. The older and more long-lived races have few women and fewer children. There are no elven children spoken of in all the rings, and it is said also of dwarves that they often do not desire marriage, being engrossed in their crafts. The Ents seem to live more or less forever, but even they are dying out. There have been no endings, not for a terribly long count of years, true it says to the hobbits. Barrenness also characterizes Gondor, the eldest human kind of nation in Middle-earth. Once great, the city of Minas Tirith has declined, and Dickens sees that many houses have fallen empty, so that it lacked half the men that could have dwelt at peace there. It's not just actual barrenness, but even the impending chance of it is a cause of fear for the characters, such as the fear of Denethor, who insists, though he is old, he is not yet dotard to Faramir, and Aragorn, whose wisdom it is to go with good grace before he grows feeble with age. Eowyn eloquently sums up the fear of outliving one's capacity. She fears a cage, to spend a life behind bars until use and old age accept them, and all chance of great deeds is gone beyond recall or desire. But for the elves, this idea of outliving one's time is one of the conditions of their existence. Their native land, Valinor, is a land of immortality where naught fades nor withers. However, Tolkien names it, consciously or unconsciously. Tolkien names the West, Anu, after the Celtic underworld, creating the association between Valinor and death. Aman and sorry, that's a point I keep forgetting to omit. Unlike the turbulent Middle-earth, Valinor remains unchanged through the ages of Arda, and Tolkien writes that for the elves, change is viewed as a regrettable thing, and their chief motive is the preservation of what is desired or loved, or its semblance, and anything that is destroyed in Valinor is replaced by a lesser semblance of itself. For example, the light-giving trees, Telperin and Laurelin, are succeeded by the moon, a single flower of the former, and the sun, a fruit of the latter. And no greater things are created in Valinor up to its noontime, all the way back in the first age. So, despite seeming immortality, the elven existence is one of slow and irreversible decay. Their affinity with Arda and the ability to have the greater bliss in the world comes at the cost of the finiteness of their experience in that world. By the Third Age, the elves outlived their capacity in Middle-earth and must depart it. Tolkien writes that if the elves would not come to the western shores and tarry in the lands of men, then they should slowly fade and fail. Now, fading is a really interesting concept that I believe is significant of elven mortality. And you may be most familiar with it in the case of Arwen, who after the death of Aragorn departs to Lothlorien, where she lays herself up on Ciaran Amroth, and there is her green grave until the world is changed. And fading appears to be a process of voluntary death following a great trauma or exertion of the spirit, such as in the cases of Arwen or Miriel. However, Tolkien also writes in the Laws and Customs that as ages passed, the dominance of the elves there ever increased, consuming their bodies, and the end of this process is their fading, for the body becomes at last, as it were, a memory held by the fair. So the elves are indeed deathless and may not be destroyed or changed. It's unclear what happens to the body after fading. It may either become invisible but remain tangible, like the Nazgul, or it may be arrested in its optimal state and no longer undergo physical change. A clue is given in a discourse of Finrod and Andreth that has been mentioned previously, that the living eyes may draw from the fair within an image which the houseless conveys to the housed, the memory of itself. This suggests that when a living being sees a fated soul, it may appear as a spectre of the body it had when alive. In any case, according to Tolkien's logic of the union of fair and mondo equal in life, fated elves are immortal because their bodies become extensions of their souls and can no longer be separated, so they cannot be killed. However, Tolkien does not countermount the idea of fading as death. Perhaps the fated elves are only deathless because they have died already, yet having died, they continue to exist and to be conscious. And this is where a major concept that Yeats uses for his elves comes into play. Yeats writes that there is a war between the living and the dead, and when the potatoes or the wheat or any other of the fruits of the earth decay, they ripen in fairy. His elves exist in a state that is a polar opposite of the human condition. For a mortal to be alive in fairy is to be dead in our world, as Lusheen is for 300 years in the wanderings of Lusheen. The same logic is applicable to Tolkien's elves. They are exact opposites of mortals. Their bodies are able to survive indefinitely, but their souls are finite as opposed to the mortals' frail bodies and infinite souls. So, Athrabeth Finrod was written after The Lord of the Rings, and Christopher Tolkien presents it as the definitive work on the fate of the elves after the end of Arda, and also on the division between mortality and immortality. In it, Tolkien writes that elvish immortality is bounded within a part of time which one would call the history of Arda, and is therefore strictly to be called rather serial longevity, the utmost limit of which is the length of the existence of Arda. A corollary of this is that the elvish fair is also limited to the time of Arda, or at least held within it and unable to leave it while it lasts. And he continues that all elves will die at the end of Arda, because their purpose in Ilúvatar's plan will be fulfilled. And it is said truly by Finrod Felagund that while men have a shadow behind them, and that would be the initial gift of mortality, the elves have a shadow before them, the terror of impending annihilation. And while mortal souls will join the powers renewed in a second music that will recreate Arda without blemish, elves will only survive as a distant memory held by those mortal souls. So far, we've talked only of personal immortality, and that's the survival of the individual conscious I of the elves. But philosopher Eugene Fontenelle names at least 5 other types of immortality, and that's absolute spirit immortality, and we are mortal insofar as we are absorbed in the eternal spirit or everlasting God. Cosmic immortality, we're immortal as insofar as we emerged from and return to the cosmos and nature. Ideal immortality, we're immortal insofar as we participate in timeless values and ideals. Achievement immortality, we're immortal through our creative acts. And posterity immortality, we're immortal through our children, community, or race. And Tolkien goes to some length to ensure that elves are not immortal according to any of the types outlined by Fontenelle. Individually, they're affected by both physical death and spiritual death upon the end of Arda. Cosmically, once their purpose in Ilúvatar's plan is fulfilled, they will be annihilated and not reintegrated into his plan. The nature of which they are part is, of course, Arda, which is finite and will be eventually destroyed, according to some. Their offspring vanish from Middle-earth, though they do not survive in their community or race. And the Silmarillion, as it is edited by Christopher Tolkien, ends with the words that with the last ship sailing in the west, an end comes to the elder of story and song. So their deeds and their ideals are not carried forward beyond the actual departure of the elves. And I believe that, to come back to the terms of serial longevity and holding memory, I believe that Tolkien avoids the term reincarnation not just because it is unorthodox, but because he opposes the idea of immortality altogether. The elves live indefinitely, but like the bearers of the great rings, they do not gain more life, they do not change with the time. A perfect example of that would be the community of Lothlorien, described as a form of the elder days, a place where time does not count. The elven fading, universal to the race in the Third Age, is a state of living death, of perpetuity spent in stasis. Tolkien's alternative to immortality is serial longevity, where a person retains their standard lifespan, like his characters in The Lost Road, but has access to experience and memories of generations past. And the person having access to that is liberated from the emotional baggage of a lifetime that spans centuries. And it's that overwhelming emotional experience that disintegrates and degrades elven souls, eventually making them as mortal as their bodies are. It's a very long bit beyond. Thank you. Oh, sorry. I was about to run away.
Longevity, that your life is the same, but you have access to knowledge of previous generations. And I'm kind of wondering about how connecting that to really earlier talks today, and how the first one was kind of seen as a breach of modernism breaks with access to previous generations. It denies the knowledge of what's gone before it, and how actually Tolkien's mission might be to restore that connection and try to produce that.
I absolutely agree with you. It's a case of, to my mind, Tolkien's almost saying that we're already living for too long a time, because the pace of life increases and there's more and more detachment from previous generations, and people want a longer lifespan. At the same time, their experience is so rich and often so traumatic that they can't really integrate, they can't keep pace with the time. So it's better to have a shorter lifespan, but then listen to your predecessors and have their experience to go on, that live for a very long time, eventually become lost. And it's something that's very current with the current technological advance, that many people just can't keep up with the rate at which society is going nowadays, and it's not normal for the society to go at such a pace. Yes?
I read some of these, there's also an idea of elvish immortality through a figure of transmigration of souls.
It's
controversial, I think.
There is the whole idea of rebirth within Arda, that an elven soul will, once an elf dies physically, the soul goes to the halls of waiting, rests there for a bit, and then can be reintegrated and reincarnated. But I haven't found anything on them actually transcending beyond the borders of Arda and beyond the time of Arda. There's kind of what afterlife is about, with Finrod hoping that elves will regain a place in Arda renewed, but it's all very kind of hope and guess. Yeats actually believes in the transmigration of elven souls, that elven souls are reintegrated by being reborn as humans. Yes?
This is really stream of consciousness, so bear with me here. So the Numenorian problem of the tales of the early years, which don't match with reality, which Tolkien eventually blames, was just the Numenorians writing this stuff down. And of course, the elves really didn't believe that the sun was created from the fruit and all that stuff. I'm wondering if that fits in well with the whole idea of the Numenorians vainly trying to find immortality. And he's sort of showing the problem of trying to keep this cultural memory alive, immortal for the elves, which you're showing didn't want to do that, even their deeds fade away. The Numenorians, in trying to keep those stories alive, sort of corrupt them, which again goes to the corrupting influence of trying to seek immortality.
Yes.
Does that make any sense?
I believe so. I hope I'm getting you right here, but it's all in the balance, because discarding all memory and trying to live by your experience alone is bad. But at the same time, clinging to stories of ages past, like the Numenorians do, like people in Gondor do, who made the houses of the dead, the tombs of the dead more splendid than the houses of the living, is also bad, because then you don't progress. I think it's kind of all trying to find the right balance between the two. Did that help in any way?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I agree with you.
Can you tell us a bit more about the sort of folkloric origins of this, especially in terms of how Yeats is thinking about it, how you think Tolkien's earlier elves might work with his ideas?
especially his connection with the dead, I think. Just a little, yeah.
I believe that there was much less of a division between life and death in general, and Yeats writes quite a lot about how there isn't really a division between this world and the next, and the fact that you can't see the spirits and your deceased loved ones doesn't mean that they're not there. And I believe it was very similar with Tolkien, that there is no sense that once you die you go away somewhere differently, and that changed massively with the idea of mortality as a gift. And it's not, there's a difficulty of terms, because then what do we understand as death, what do we understand as life? But the gift that J.R.R. gives to mortals is really freedom, whereas everything else is confined to this world. And for Yeats as well, elves are always confined to this plane of being. They're not in their nature transcendental. Who wants to go first?
No, I was just wondering whether this conception of fairy of Yeats is in some sense informed by his interest in occultism and gnosticism as well. We should put him quite on an opposite way in respect to
Yeah.
this kind of speaking of different ways.
To be honest, I might be raising quite a contradictory point here, but I understand that Tolkien being very Catholic and Yeats being a spiritualist and a mysticist, they come from very different places. But if you read the way they write about their experience and the way they write about faith, as in the pure form of belief, unencumbered by any institution, they're very, very similar. And kind of they seem to want very similar things from their belief, despite going to different places with it.
I'm with you there, just for the record.
Sean was going to
I was quite interested in the sort of 5 different immortalities, and I was wondering whether you think that as the Silmarils help the second movie bring about something, whether Valinor could be said to actually achieve the immortality.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
No. Because it said in the second prophecy of Mandos that the Silmarils will be broken and the light will be taken to facilitate the second music. The light was not created by Valinor, it was just captured, so it's not really his deed that is being used. The Silmarils are just receptacles that will be destroyed before Ardor and Minyalta is created.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.